Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of the Future Ready series powered by Microsoft. I'm your host, Gautam Srinivasan, and our theme for today's conversation is reimagining the workplace. Now, over the past decade, a growing number of organizations recognize the need for their employees to work seamlessly and securely from anywhere. Some estimates have even pegged expansion of remote working habits by 400% during this period. But with the onset of the pandemic, the idea of remote work emerged from being restricted to a few pockets to become more mainstream across the enterprise and cover more diverse functions spanning the likes of finance, HR, marketing, R&D, purchasing, and many more. Now, this new working environment has required everyone to complement traditional communication tools and in person collaboration with alternative solutions, quickly digitalizing everything we do across our life. Today, businesses have gotten better at e commerce, and companies have hired a new generation of graduates who have met their teams only through a screen. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, what's next? As we look forward to a post pandemic work environment, it has become important to recognize that the two major questions organizations must articulate remain the same as before the pandemic. How do we make money and how is the work done? In this context, it is also important to understand which changes brought about by the hybrid workplace will be temporary and which will be permanent. How will this change can drive more inclusivity in the workplace, or rather the culture of the workplace, and how companies can empower employees while also protecting vital IT assets? Here, a survey by McKinsey highlights some interesting contrasts. More than three-quarters of C suite executives surveyed expect the typical core employee to be back in the office 3 or more days a week. On the other hand, nearly three-quarters of around 5,000 employees queried globally would like to work from home for 2 or more days per week, and more than half want at least 3 days of remote work. So, can technology provide a bridge to drive more value for the enterprise in hybrid work environments and enable employees to feel part of this loop of transformation where EX or employee experience is as important to companies as CX or customer experience? Can the hybrid work paradox be solved so that the great resignation of today leads to the great reshuffle and ultimately the great attraction for talent? That's what we are here to find out. First up is a ringside view of key trends when it comes to reimagining the workplace. And for perspectives on that, we have with us today a thought leader and digital expert with years of expertise on topics of technology architecture, IT strategy, and digital transformation. It is my pleasure to welcome Sandeep Sharma, Associate Partner with McKinsey and Company, for a fireside chat. Welcome to the session, Sandeep. And of course, here's a reminder to our audience watching this session that if they have any questions for our experts, they could drop it into our social media handles, and time permitting, we'll take a few of them and get our guests to respond. All right, Sandeep, let's start with changes at the workplace in the past decade. Now, broadly, the need for business continuity in the midst of a pandemic has pushed organizations to advance their digital transformation journeys and use, say, automation in all aspects of the business to allow for interaction between the workflows and, of course, with customers and suppliers. Now, you have been working on digital transformations for enterprises since the past decade. So, can you tell us about this change that we are witnessing? And in your opinion, what will be temporary and what will be transformative?
First of all, thank you, Gautam, for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. You are absolutely right in that the pandemic has forced, digital transformation on a lot of organizations. In a recent survey that we did of 800 executives of, multi-billion-dollar corporation, about 85% of them have said that they are undergoing a digital transformation, and about 65% of them are undergoing automation and AI-led initiatives. So there's definitely a lot of transformation happening across industries. And while that happens, there are certain roles today that will likely be temporary, and there are certain that will evolve. And at the same time, there are some which are evolving as we speak, and the jury is still out on them. So when we talk about temporary roles, the roles that were forced by the pandemic, such as safety, audit, workplace physical distancing, these are roles which will likely over a period of time, fade out, as you can imagine, as the pandemic eases. Whereas digital transformations, building new digital businesses, driving adoption of digital services, and the roles that play a big role in that, those will continue to remain. And the reason for that is self-evident. This is not going to be a change; it's more a transformation which you will not undo. And of course, there are certain roles, such as the tele everything that you see now. Roles such as education, which is now a lot, virtually driven. There is telemedicine. Now, this is something that is evolving as we speak, and these will, likely shape the hybrid workplace as we, look into the next few years.
All right, let's come to the big question on the mind of every leader in an enterprise. Do you think employees can reach their maximum potential even in a hybrid work model? And if so, what are the best practices which will help ensure the successful design and implementation of a sort of a holistic reskilling program when seen across three iterative phases of a skills transformation, which is assessing potential skills gap, developing a skills strategy, and reimagining infrastructure for skilling at scale?
No, this is a great question. I think it's important to acknowledge that when we talk about a hybrid workplace, not all types of professions are amenable for either remote work purely or a hybrid workplace. And there is a set of functions in financial services, for instance, in management, in professional and technical services, which are definitely a lot more amenable for remote work and hybrid work. And there are some which are heavily dependent on physical presence, such as construction, health, in many cases, warehousing. In these kind of professions, it's going to be much more difficult to have a hybrid sort of location or workplace. However, in the professions that are amenable, I think, as you rightly said, there are three sort of buckets to look at when you talk about assessing what are the skills needed. It's important to take into account what are the roles of the future, what are the skills of the future, and the whole question of what is temporary and what is going to be permanent is very important here. And that's one of the considerations when we look at assessment. The second one you want to look at is also the demand and supply for these skills. As you can imagine, again, given the constraints that we are currently witnessing, there is going to be a lot of supply implications, especially on critical talent, and that's important to also assess as we look into the future. When we look at creating a strategy, I think it's important to consider two, three things. One is, what are the type of learning journeys that the organization will want to create? And the learning journeys will, of course, vary based on the roles, based on the progression of those roles. So, how would you treat, for instance, a product manager in an organization, and how does a project manager today evolve into becoming a product manager? Or how do you help someone develop skills in machine learning, building machine learning models? So these are the type of questions we'll need to think about when you consider creating learning journeys. And finally, when we talk about creating the infrastructure, I think two things are important. One is, of course, the learning infrastructure itself. What are the learning platforms, the partnerships, and so on? But also, what is the culture and the mindset in the organization? And this learning orientation is very important across all levels of the organization. I think those are the critical success factors.
All right. Another question to that will be retention as we move on from skilling and try to retain employees. Now, of course, this unplanned pandemic infused, redefinition of the workplace, it has come with its fair share of challenges, retention being one. Could you enlist some more of the major ones that you've seen from your experience of working on digital transformation? And specifically, when I look at retention, in terms of the great resignation underway globally, McKinsey research shows that employees were far more likely to prioritize relational factors, whereas employers were more likely to focus on transactional ones. Now, considering a heavy-handed back-to-office policy or other mandates deliver from on high, no matter how well intentioned, they're likely to backfire. So, how do enterprises turn attrition to attraction?
Yeah, it's a very important point that you're raising. And if you look a little bit deeper into the survey that you mentioned, there's a survey that looked at roughly about 6,000 employees across all sectors, about 250 talent managers, again, across sectors. And what we found was about 40% of the people surveyed indicated that they will leave their current job in the next 3 to 6 months. and of the people that had already quit in the survey, about 30% had quit without having an offer. And of the people that are saying they will quit, there are roughly about 60% that are saying they do not have an offer lined up. So you are absolutely right in that the attrition is front and center of this issue. However, if you dig then one more level deeper as to what is causing this, and it's somewhat counterintuitive in nature. It's not the typical transactional elements, as you mentioned, around compensation or around better job opportunities. It is actually the more relational factors such as, what is the sense of belonging in this environment? Do they work in a caring team environment? Are they valued? Is their work valued by management? Is there a shared sense of purpose? So it is really that, and therefore the iceberg is deeper than what you see on top. And therefore, if we then look at, how do we address some of these challenges? I think a few elements to take stock of. One, the kind of skills that are needed to lead in this kind of environment, in this hybrid setup, is definitely different from what you would see in a traditional environment. Therefore, you need not managers but coaches, because when there is an employee that is helping resolve a business process issue while working remotely, they're also dealing with caregiving responsibilities. So the manager cannot be looking at pure metrics, but will also need to help solve some of the employees' challenges when you're looking at it. The second is, as you said, is the work environment really transactional? Is it just a job that gives a paycheck, or is there a deeper sense of purpose? I think that it's important to create that sense of purpose amongst employees. And then lastly, when we look at benefits alignment, is what the employee does, is it sort of aligned with what they need in these kind of hybrid environments, right? So it's no longer, for instance, getting a parking slot or having commute to office kind of facilities. Is it, do I have more flexible working hours? Can I actually pick up and schedule my own sort of work environment? And is my sort of management then accommodative of that? Those are the real kind of considerations that employees now are thinking about. And therefore, looking at these three broad factors is probably more helpful in this context.
All right. A great point that you mentioned is that managers now need to think of themselves as coaches rather than referees. But in the context of whether the employee feels valued by the management, the fear for some would be, are they part of the in group or the out group? Because if there's going to be a hybrid model of work and someone is working remotely, their fear would be, if someone is working in office with the leadership, they stand to, have a deeper connect. So in your opinion, how can technology help in preventing in and out groups at the hybrid workplace so that remote workers don't feel like they're part of the out group rather than the in group? What part do leaders play here in driving an inclusive workplace?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. It's combination of both good leadership as well as how we use the tools that we have at our disposal. So as you can imagine, there are tools, plenty of tools available for better collaboration, better communication. However, how do we, as leaders, make them part of the workflows, make them, inclusive, and therefore improve employee experience overall? So if we consider, for instance, things like what you would normally do in an office environment, such as managing tasks using a physical board or a post-it Kanban chart, can we move that to digital? Can we move actual information management, actual files, actual documents through tools that allow not only collaboration easily, but also annotation, task management, and so on. And finally, using video conferencing tools to be more inclusive. So one example of that is how we do team rooms in McKinsey, for example. We have a team room where there'll be a part of the team that is physically present. There'll be team members that are remotely present. We leave, for instance, the video on for anyone to sort of always jump in and talk. So it always feels like it's an immersive experience where team members don't feel like they're plugging in only when there is a meeting on. So I think there are these small things that we can do that go a long way. But I think the key thing is being empathetic to people that are not in person, and then using tools appropriately in the workflows.
I think that's a key word there, empathy. That's going to define how employer-employee relationships they pan out from here on. Well, from a bird's eye view of the trends shaping the workplace of the future, let's take a deep dive now into the ways in which technology is enabling a reimagination of work. And for that, we're joined by Geeta Gurnani, country head for the modern work business at Microsoft India. Now, Geeta has helped several businesses transform the way they work in a hybrid work environment by unleashing the power of their people. So, Geeta, let's get you in to talk about the broad technology landscape in the context of the various themes that we have discussed so far. So, the first question to you is, how can technology be leveraged to enable people to work and collaborate from anywhere and from any device?
Thanks, Gautam, and I hope all the listeners who are listening our conversation are safe and secure because I think everyday things are changing. And I was much enjoying your conversation with Sandeep around this subject that what are the emerging trends. Now, jumping into the technology, I usually start with what Satya said that in hybrid world, the things will become more complex and not simple. So let's just accept that we will learn every day as we go along the journey of becoming a truly hybrid enterprises, right? Now, having said that, the another element I think we should be focusing, because you and Sandeep were just now discussing about the inclusive meeting part of it, that now it's not about individual productivity. I think we need to think about the collaborative productivity of the people, right, or of the team. Now, with the experience of last 18 months of pandemic and how we've been helping our partners and customer leverage technology, we sort of come to a hypothesis that the technology intervention would be required at three areas largely as we get into the hybrid world. So the first area would be the people, which is how do we really facilitate collaboration among people, which could be synchronous conversation, asynchronous conversation. How do you use, let's say, whiteboards to do brainstorming on a digital platform, or how do you share documents and exchange the data more fast on these platforms? So the first part would be of the people, that how are we really facilitating this whole collaboration using the tools, and they are not sort of really struggling to use one tool for communication, the other tool for doing email, and the third tool for doing the collaboration, how all of this is integrated. The second part is that how do you intervene and reimagine the physical places, right? Because I think we can't really demean the importance of the physical place, but for us to ensure that the people who are not physically present in the room as you collaborate, how do we extend them the similar sort of an experience of being in room? I think I usually call this that how do we create equitable inclusive experience, right? So in the places part, when it comes to technology, I think we are working with lot many partners of Microsoft like Polycom and others, where we are designing what we call modern meeting rooms, where the people who are in the room, as they start to talk, the smart cameras will just switch to those individual videos so that you get an experience and create an experience for the people who are actually sitting remotely to have that one-on-one kind of an interaction. Or I think we are also encouraging at a policy level that the people who are sitting remote can use a lot of emotions, which is the emojis which has been introduced into these systems to really participate in the conversation. And I'll just throw one fact, Gautam, that we did a scientific research to figure out that just changing the setting of a mode, what we call together mode in Teams, it just allows you to get a feel that you're sitting off site or you're sitting in the same conference room. The attentiveness or the inclusivity of the meeting really, really increased. And the load on the brain was much lower for the people who were doing remotely joining the meetings, right? So, places where we design modern meeting rooms and use Teams to help interact is the second intervention which we talk. I think the third and a very, very important one, and I just love this analogy from one of my customer when they said that for me, Teams is a new workplace, which means every morning I get up, get ready, and log into Teams. That's my new workplace. So how would you bring every business process or the function I touch as part of my work in the flow of my work, so that I am not really switching across multiple applications just to get my job done, as I would have, let's say, done in my physical world, or maybe now better, because generally you don't just go from physical to digital, but I think digital gives you a lot more opportunities which you are not able to do in the physical world, right? So that automation of process is important one. I'll just take one simple example how we are using at Microsoft, that we created an application called Return to Workplace, right? Where every day morning if I'm going office, or I can actually share with my team that how many days I'll be in office and how many days I'll be in home. I also declare that when I'm visiting office, I can just take a health check and just log in through the same app saying that, okay, I've taken my self-attested health check and I'm good to go. And also inform that app informs my cafeteria guy that how many lunches to be arranged as so many people are coming now, because that's an unpredictable part, right? So just summarizing again, the technology intervention at people, process, and places, these are three P's is what we are witnessing. But of course we are learning as we go forward with our customers in this journey.
Absolutely. From the perspective of people, places, and process, we are seeing how solutions are also about thinking about the context. Because, as you said, you need to create solutions which integrate natively in the workflow of any employee. And also, as you mentioned, the changing ethos where it's not just about individual productivity, it's about collaborative productivity and sort of creating an equitable, inclusive experience, which will define the new interaction between an enterprise and its employee. But to take that a bit forward, can you tell us a bit about more about Microsoft's modern work suite of solutions? And I want to understand how it enables Microsoft itself to embrace the future of work.
Okay, so let me just touch upon Viva. I think that's what largely from a future of work perspective, which goes beyond people, process, and places and brings it all together. And there was an interesting study which was done in terms of saying that if you were to create an employee experience, which is not letting them really go across multiple technologies and tool, but feel as part of the one single organization wherever they are working with, we launched this suite which we call Microsoft Viva, which is primarily designed around the employees' well-being and the growth. I think it's a very, very important aspect when we are looking at a future of work, that how we are taking care of the communication for these employees, how we are taking care of their growth, which is actually largely they link very heavily with the learning, that how is their learning happening, part of well-being, that are they really not facing this digital fatigue as we call. And I think if you see, Gautam, we used to have a lot of corridor conversations where you will interact and gain knowledge beyond your own team. You will just meet people in the cafeteria or gallery or water cooler conversations as we used to call, right? So what we're trying to do in Microsoft Viva, that how do we bring all these elements of knowledge, well-being, learning, growth into technology and facilitate that. I'll give one example, which is, let's say, starting from the insight, which actually addresses the well-being part from Viva. We saw earlier we used to have a lot of large group meetings, format meetings on Monday mornings or Fridays. And we witnessed that a lot of people were actually setting up meetings to do a sync as they go before into those Monday morning meetings. And we saw some calendars which were happening, scheduled calendars happening over the weekend. So as a company, we took a decision when we got these insights that employees are actually setting up meeting on the weekend. We said, no large format meetings on Monday mornings, and invest in your learning, invest in planning your Monday mornings. Also, there was a lot more guidance which came after analyzing that how many people actually have scheduled meetings after office hours, right? So there was a data points which were presented to the managers, and of course manager played an important role in modeling that behavior of not setting the meeting outside of the office hours, right? So that is something which we actually took a lot of help from Viva Insight, which is actually also for individuals insight about how are they spending their time, and also for organizations to look at that how do they take care of the well-being of the people. The second part was about learning, because learning right now in most of the organization it's scattered, and so it was for Microsoft that we were going into different places, which is our own learning system, the third party LinkedIn Learning, and few other recommended collaborations which we have with the likes of Coursera. But what we did using Viva Learning, that we brought everything together in one interface in the Teams as an interface, which I was calling is, let's say, a workplace for all of us. And actually, last week, I designed a learning calendar for my entire team, saying the team, this is our collective learning calendar. And those were recommendation. And people now, after they take course, they actually give their feedback also, that how good that was, what was their takeaway from that, right? So that's how we are adopting this. And I'll just touch upon the last piece, which is Viva Connection, because there is definitely a challenge of connecting with experts in hybrid world, because as I said, you don't have an opportunity for those corridor conversations. So connections actually gives you a place in teams to really connect with the experts, because people, if you just search about an expertise saying AI expert or a hybrid work expert, it just throws you various functions in the organization and the name of experts who are working in that area, right? So personally, I think I'm a big admirer of Viva, that how Viva is helping to create that employee experience. And I think we at Microsoft are fully leveraging this technology to really invest in our employees' growth and individuals' growth.
All right. So connections, topics, learning, and insights. That pretty much sums up the Viva suite. And it's great to see how organizations are making data work for them, how leaders are making data work for them. In that context, Sandeep, what does the technology landscape for remote working look like according to you from a broad perspective?
Yeah, I think Geeta shared a very good live example of how a large organization can use technology and tools. If we look at, what are the big sort of workflow elements that we normally encounter in a remote working scenario, I think there are 5 to 6 key areas to look at. Content creation is the first sort of bucket in any of the workflow activities. You're creating information documents, you're creating workflow documents. So step number one, tools that enable content creation, and can you do that in a collaborative way? Then of course the video conferencing tools, there are plenty in the market. So how do you use them for your benefit to make sure, in addition to using content creation tools, also use video conferencing tools? Then you have your document sharing tools, which in addition to content sharing will also, content creation will enable better sharing, better control, dissemination. Then channel based communication, especially in a remote working type of scenario, there will be employees who are mobile. How do you have the right channels of communication, both instant and otherwise? And then task management. Finally, once there is a set of tasks being identified, there's a workflow around those tasks. How do you manage allocation and then life cycle tracking of those tasks? I think these are the big sort of buckets of tools available for remote working. I think the key thing here again goes back to experience. While these are tools in isolation, do we have the right experience around them? Do we have, for instance, a single sign-on in the enterprise that links all of this, rather than multiple sort of IDs being floating around in the organization? Do you have the right kind of communication, notification tools that sort of synchronize all of these tools together? I think those are also important as you consider tools. And I think Gita touched upon some of those elements as well.
All right. In fact, in one of my earlier discussions, this was mentioned, the context of how the solutions are developed, whereby if an employee has to go through 7 steps to achieve just one thing, that's not a framework which is working. But fair point. And here's a reminder to our audience as well, watching this special presentation on reimagining the workplace. If you have any questions for our experts, drop them to our social media handles and we'll take a few of them at the end of the session. Meanwhile, Geeta, coming to you, security breaches on enterprise networks, they are emerging as a major area of concern as attacks are getting more sophisticated every day and workloads and data volumes and networks are only increasing. So in your view, how can enterprises ensure data security across a mix of devices and locations that information is being shared between? Because we are in an omni-channel world where touch points rather are growing exponentially, whether it's from the customer facing side or whether it's from the employee facing side. So how do they approach security?
So great question, Gautam. And I think I keep thinking that now actually enterprises, small business, and even individuals are very worried about the data security, because I think security is a one of the big concern. And to address this, I think we just we just go with the zero trust framework as our guiding principle as we engage with the enterprises, that how they should be thinking about the whole data security part of it, right? And I'll just throw some light that what does zero security or zero trust framework really mean. It just simply says that verify explicitly, which means everything needs to be verified, whether it's your identity, whether it's your location, whether your device's health or any data classification. Everything needs to be verified explicitly. Give least privileged access. And I just love this part which says that just in time and just enough access. Don't give the access which is not required at right point in time. And the third one is assume breach, that there is a breach. So how would you really protect the breach? And that's the zero trust framework, which then actually goes to address every layer of security, which is starting from your device to your network, to your data, to your app, to your infrastructure, right? So I invite organizations to really think about zero trust framework maturity in terms of where are they in their journey of the zero trust framework. And the another important part I want to highlight, that sometimes this whole framework exists, and average, Gotham, trust me, there are about a mature enterprise has a range between either 10 to 40 different vendors doing this job for them on security, small, right? So your risk exposure score is really high because you have to ensure that all of these tools are working together to give you this zero trust framework, right? So I think important for organizations to see that how are they ensuring that their risk exposure score is lower even if they have invested in all of these technology. And that's where I think Microsoft comes in, because probably we are the only vendor right now who can consolidate all these 40 into one single platform. Okay. And there was a lot of demand, by the way, from small businesses around enterprise, around security, which was a little bit surprise to us that they wanted to invest big time in security because of the ransomware attacks and how their business really go down if the cyber attacks are happening. And we actually recently launched a product called Microsoft Defender for SMBs or small businesses, where small businesses can actually secure their entire infrastructure what they are having. But since we are talking in the context of collaboration right now and the communication, I just want to highlight a minute on that. When you leverage Microsoft Teams for doing the communication and collaboration, I think it just ticks all the boxes of security of the collaboration and communication, which means every file you stored in SharePoint is backed up by SharePoint encryption. If you're using identity access, it is integrated with your Active Directory in your system. And Teams actually complies with the 17 global industry standards across the globe, which will actually help you meet your industry specific or your country specific compliance demands, right? And every content which is shared over Teams, whether it's in transit or at a data center in rest, it's actually fully encrypted. So zero trust, looking at the risk exposure score, what you have. And of course, the step one is definitely securing your entire communication collaboration. I think those are the three elements I would definitely recommend every organization and enterprise to look at.
Makes sense. I mean, when you consolidate your entire security orchestration, it enables you to approach security as a value enabler, because then you have enough bandwidth to focus on what actually matters to the enterprise and how you can drive more collaborative productivity within the workplace. And as you mentioned, Teams comes with inbuilt security. So such a kind of a solution which has all the tick marks, it kind of is a boon to the enterprise. Meanwhile, as we approach this last leg of the conversation, let me get some forward looking statements from both Sandeep and Geeta. Sandeep, according to a new research by McKinsey, more than half of the workers surveyed, they prefer a more flexible working model post pandemic. So what are your predictions for the workplace of the future?
I think this is a situation that is evolving, and of course, as the situation evolves, these trends will also change. But I think one thing which is very clear from all the conversations is that the hybrid workplace is here to stay. There is going to be a version of this that will continue to remain as we look forward. And in that circumstance, I think there are three considerations to look at. Consideration number one is what is the role of the office and in-person meetings in the future. And Geeta gave examples of how there is a very purposeful planning of the day. There is communication of that plan for the day, so that teams are aware of what they can accomplish when they are in office, and therefore what will the in-person discussions accomplish. I think just thinking about the role of the office and in-person meetings is one consideration. The second is what we talked about briefly before, which is the mindset and the culture. How do you lead in this kind of an environment? A change in the operating model also means change in leadership styles that are needed, and therefore, are leaders more inclusive? Are they more empathetic to colleagues who are in different locations? And then finally, being aware of the risks. Again, we talked about one type of risk, which is the cyber risk, and the data breaches and so on. There's also the other type of risk that is to be aware of. We talked about the in group and the out group. There is a risk of promoting, or rather a risk of not having inclusivity. There is also a risk of biases that are creeping in, especially when there are colleagues with caregiving responsibilities. So I think important to be aware of those risks. And I think the key thing to mitigate most of these is being very clear in communication, being open, having leadership driving all of this in a purposeful and top-down ways. I think is important.
All right, Geeta, your thoughts in a world where talent is the scarcer of the two capitals, that is, human capital being scarcer than financial capital. How do you see companies adjusting to what the top talent wants?
So great, I think, segue to what Sandeep was just talking about. And I'll just give one example that you're aware of the LinkedIn's this tool called Glint, which is actually a survey feedback which tells you that how your employees are feeling. Okay. And what we were trying to do that when we created Viva, which I spoke about from an employee experience standpoint, we were just trying to see that how they are feeling to what they are doing, how do these two components marry? And that's where the Viva was designed to say that in a survey feedback, you tell me how you're feeling about your top talent to your long tail of the talent in terms of their aspects or their point of view across multiple initiative what organizations are taking. But what are they really doing? That data was missing, and that's where when we started to marry these two data, that actually tells us the real need of how do we adjust to the top talent's need, right? And I'll just quote one example. Since you mentioned financial capital, there was a time when finance, accounting, warehouse, everything was converged a couple of decades back, where we brought ERP, which actually consolidated each of this to smoothen that whole operation of finance for the organization. I think it's now time from ERP to EXP, which is the employee experience part of it, where one has to really ensure that for all the top talent, how do you bring the different elements of learning, the HR, the work, everything at one place for them, so that you create that differentiated employee experience for them, and you create those relational relationships as you were calling out, where I think every talent feels that companies are invested in their growth, invested in their learning, taking care of their needs by not just they telling that how they feel, but data throwing those results, that how many times I'm working outside of my work hours, or how many times I'm really working over hours, which is 12 hours in a week, right? So I think companies need to invest into technology to really take a pulse of the situation, what's happening, and continuously, I think, redesign their policies and think about how will they create this greater experience to attract the talent, as you were saying, rather than retain the talent, Gautam.
All right, quite an eventful journey we've had from ERP to EXP, as Geeta says. And we look forward to how the workplace of the future maybe redefines the meaning of collaboration and, of course, productivity itself, where it is a default rather than optional. And on that note, let me take a question from the audience, which is in that context that, we've come so far, but does it really matter? Because we've seen the pandemic, in a sense, forcing the hand for many companies. But the worry for employees would be, once things go back to normal, will all this talk of reimagining the workplace go away? It's a somber question. It is a fair question. But let me see what our experts have to say on that. Do you think these changes are here to stay? Sandeep, Geeta, your thoughts on this? Sandeep, in case you have a view, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, I think there are certain changes which will definitely stay. As we talked about, digital transformation, building digital businesses. I think um, transformations that have already been started, those are transformations that will stay. The way organizations will do businesses will unlikely to regress back to the physical ways, especially when the digital one is more efficient, more convenient, and much more sort of profitable for any organization. So I think there are certain aspects of this transformation that will likely stay, and it's similar to the hybrid workplace discussion that we were having. There are certain occupations, certain roles which will also continue to be in this mode as we look into the future.
All right, Geeta, any words of reassurance from you as this journey, as you detail from ERP to EXP progresses? Will those changes stick? That's the worry. So, what's your reassurance to the viewer watching?
Yeah, I think it will stay. And I'll just give you one very simple example. And I'm quoting more and more my customer interaction. And let me not quote an enterprise experience this time, and let me quote an example or a conversation with a principal from a higher ed college. Okay. And also from another school which I was interacting with. And they were very, very simple in their approach. Look at the Delhi right now. We all were struggling with the air quality, and most of the time schools need to shut down because the kids really can't be exposed to that air quality. Now, thanks to the technology that they learned how to study digitally, they were saying that we will not shut down. And for that entire month or 15 days, the kids will continue to learn on these digital part, right? So I think the hybrid has opened up different avenues. And another example, if you look at the healthcare, earlier the telemedicine or consultation was not there in India, right? Look at what pandemic has done and the amount of benefit it has given to the people who just can't stand in the queues, or maybe want to living in the remote area and want to take a facility from the hospitals from Delhi, Mumbai, or the top metro city. They are able to take. So I think my take on this is that it is here to stay, and even more so ever, it will help us address few things which we were not able to address in the physical world, right? So few
Hmm.
industries, I think, really really getting benefit out of it. And I think this will help us really, all of us as a country, to move forward in digital era.
All right. Another question which gets bandied about is all this talk around reimagining the workplace only relevant for large enterprises considering the resources which are required to be invested? What about small and medium businesses? Now, Microsoft does have solutions like Teams Essentials, but in the broader context of this question of reimagining the workplace and its impact for small and medium businesses, what thoughts would you have? Geeta, we'll take your view on this, and Sandeep, if you have something to add, we can take yours as well. Geeta?
Sure. So I think let me just add that, and I think we as a company, and I also as an individual, have a lot of respect for these SMBs who are actually at the forefront, and we are here largely calling them as a frontline workers who are like in the
Hmm.
front, in the field, right? And not really having the large devices like us to operate and sit at the fancy office and then do all of that work which we spoke about, right? I think we are cognizant of this fact, and hence at Microsoft, we actually have launched what we call frontline worker teams as a version, which you can actually use from your mobile phone, and you don't really have to have the full fledged laptops to really work on that. So we are definitely are invested into these SMBs, as we call, or the frontline workers digital adoption of the tools. And trust me, they are at the benefit of most, because earlier, for doing small activities, they were to go back to office to even upload and submit a lot of paperwork as they were working in the field, or taking approvals as they were in the field. But I think with a pandemic forcing people to adopt digital and not being able to go to office back, they actually learned everything to do through the mobile phones and through digital technology. So I feel it is far more relevant to the SMBs and the frontline workers, because they are almost eliminating, Gautam, the use of emails and back to office kind of a stuff. They're just doing everything on these instant messaging platforms. and the teams like platform which allow them to even do some process automation, these simple shifts and approvals and all of that I have seen happening in the SMBs and even in the frontline workers. So that's my take on this, that much more relevant for the people who are completely operating on the mobile.
Taking a cue from that, Sandeep, how will the nature of this workplace reimagination, as we are saying, how does it differ for, say, small enterprises and large enterprises? Smaller enterprises, of course, being more nimble and more open to doing different things.
I think it'll probably help the small enterprises a lot more in terms of impact than it does large enterprises, just because of, as you said, their ability to adopt these kind of technologies and embed them into their flows a lot more easily and a lot more quickly. Just to give you an example, a lot of these kind of remote collaboration, these kind of accounting, HR tools are now available in SaaS form, which means your ability as a small enterprise to quickly sign on, subscribe, and get your employees onboarded. It can be done in a matter of hours, if not even quicker. You don't have to get into long-term agreements. There are no complicated license agreements and so on, which makes it a lot easier for them to onboard themselves. And as Geeta said, these are now available in various form factors, in limited device specific avatars as well. So that makes it easier for them to adopt, and then also helps them become a lot more digital early on. So they become early adopters in that sense of technologies, which then you are usually followed by large enterprises.
All right, a final thought on which verticals show the most promise when it comes to reimagining the workplace. Geeta, any thoughts on that? Any specific areas? Because when we look at, say, fintech or BFSI, we see that they are more technology friendly versus, say, manufacturing, although that story is changing. Manufacturing is also embracing digital transformation, but usually they're not the sharpest end of the spear when it comes to talking about digital. So in terms of the promise, this, attaining this promised land of improving collaborative productivity versus individual productivity, which sectors do you see the impact being most because of digital?
I think I'll just categorize into two parts. One, let's say from a beneficiary standpoint, that who are the one who are already getting maximum benefit out of this is what I would say the professional services, which is the ITIS as we call them as an industry, because I think they got maximum out of this whole hybrid part of the work. But I would differ a little bit, Gautam, because I saw that manufacturing actually came forward very, very heavily as we were talking about the hybrid work. And two of the top manufacturing customers, let's say Mahindra and Pidilite, are actually our top customers who adopted this very early on. So I think if you see from a beneficiary standpoint, it is ITIS. But if you see from a business impact standpoint, or even transforming that business, let me call it that way, they're changing business models because of this, then it is actually the manufacturing, healthcare, education. I think those are, in my mind, a couple of industries which will actually change the way they work completely using this whole hybrid kind of an environment. Of course, BFSI always, or telecom always stays, continue to be staying at the forefront when it comes to the technology. But that's largely my take from an beneficiary to the highest impact in terms of changing their business models itself. Handing
All
over to
right.
Sandeep for his view. Yeah.
Sandeep, your thoughts? I mean, Geeta's covered pretty much the entire gamut: manufacturing, healthcare, education. We're seeing all these success stories emerge. In your view, which vertical we might have missed out, which actually is showing a lot of promise when it comes to reimagining the workplace using the power of digital?
As you said, I think the big tech cores are probably leading the pack in all of this, and they're also the ones who were the early adopters when we first encountered the pandemic to move to a fully remote model. They're also the ones that are now a lot more sort of clear in the fact that they will operate remotely forever. You've heard of tech companies that are claiming that they will be forever remote. There are organizations now that are saying we're remote only. So I think I would say at the front of the pack are the tech companies, the ones that are leading the pack on this. But on everything else, I would agree and echo with what Geeta said. I think BFSI, telco for sure are adopters of this hybrid workplace. But also there are fundamental business model and operating model changes that are happening in other industries, which are also,
Hmm.
changing the way the traditional industries work now.
All right, one last question, and this one comes from Neeraj. A very interesting question. The question is that India, as a country with a large working force, also suffers from inequity of workplaces, technology, even devices. While we have discussed at length how adoption of technology is an imperative for the future of the most, how do you see adoption of technology to low wage occupation? So, while we discuss white collar, what about the blue collar workers? So, in terms of that impact, in terms of reimagining the workplace, what will the blue collar workers see? Any thoughts on this, Geeta or Sandeep?
Why don't I go first, and I'll
Sure.
start with what I said at the beginning. There are a certain set of industries which are a lot more amenable for this kind of model. The ones which are primarily knowledge based, primarily rely on information that is handled digitally, and then there is a set of industries which are more physical in nature. And we talked about construction, we talked about automotive, and these are less amenable. So I think while that is the case, there are still certain professions which, if you include last mile delivery, logistics, these are traditionally, physical in nature. They tended not to be digital, but now with a digital overlay on top of them, they're also becoming a lot more prevalent in these kind of industries, and therefore helping, a segment of the population which previously would not have used digital as much. And because of that, they can do better planning, they can do better forecasting of their own cash flows, they can operate much more efficiently as well. So I think there's definitely an impact of this across all segments, and this is now going into industries which where it was not there previously.
All right. Geeta, your thoughts on this? We've spoken about creating an inclusive experience, but when we look at it from the lens of this question, it becomes even more important. Your thoughts on this?
I think, Gautam, if you see, by and large, as a India, we are a mobile first country, right? Our first screens are mobile, actually. And I think, thanks to the mobile revolution, our people, whether it's a low wage or the white collar, they know very well now the use of the mobile phones. So I think I see from a benefit or an impact standpoint, if we take mobility at the heart of it, of delivering the digital transformation for the low wage occupation, I think it's playing a very very important role. So as I said, let's just think about uh, a delivery guy who's coming to your doorstep to deliver something now also brings a mobile phone saying that, ma'am, can you just sign it as a digital sign, and just takes away that phone, right, as a digital part of the whole chain of what they have to deliver to us, right? So I don't think that there is not a future which is there with the low wage occupation. I think the future is very very bright there, and I think they are the most beneficiary, as I said, because of the mobility aspect
Hmm.
of it. I think the important question for us to realize would be that they might be using some technology just to do messaging, let's say WhatsApp. It just changed the whole game for them, right? But are we giving them some process automation in that? That is more important, because chat I can do, but do I need to still visit office to submit paper, get approval, be in front of, let's say, a laptop to do a data entry and then get an approval, all of that part? I think if we can automate couple of top use cases, I call them jobs to be done, Gautam. That what are the jobs to be done for these small and medium enterprises, and say that these are top 5 jobs, let's say invoice generation to the signature part of it, which need to be embedded. If we can focus more on that, I think it's a much brighter focus, and we are definitely working at Microsoft for that. And as you're aware, that only as recent as last night, we announced Team Essential, which is like rupees 100 per month for you to really enable collaboration among this community which we are talking about. Because if you just take a fare of moving from one place to other, now in the auto itself it's like 100 rupees, and you are investing in a fully secured tool to enable that kind of a collaboration. So I think the key would be to focus on these process automation and not purely on the chat or the messaging part of it. Future very very bright, and we are definitely working towards it.
Absolutely. And it's also changing the narrative around automation, where it's seen as augmenting capabilities and not replacing capabilities. It helps you work better, and in a sense democratizing data to make sure outcomes are met, and it benefits both the enterprise and of course the employees in service of that customer. But well, we have run out of time, a wide ranging discussion, and I'm sure we could keep going on and on, but we have limited time. On that note, it's time to wrap up our talk around reimagining the workplace as part of the Future Ready series powered by Microsoft. I'd like to thank both Sandeep and Geeta for driving the conversation towards meaningful outcomes, and of course sharing examples where a new kind of thinking around the work that we do has demonstrably appreciated in value, supported by technology. I'd also like to thank our viewers for tuning in. We'll be back with another session very soon. Till then, this is Gautam Srinivasan signing off. Have a great day.
Thank you.